Welcome back to Next Life Garage. Today we're working on the Buick again, Ant Buck. Got the thermostat housing back off of it. We got ourselves a flat surface here to work on, a little cinder block. You can check the level of your surface with a speed square or any other kind of known straight edge that you got. Just set it on there, get eye level with it. Just kind of slide it back and forth. Make sure she's level. And that's about as level's going to get for us. Check it with this other one just to come at it from the other angle. Looks pretty good. And what I'm after today, if you can hear that, she's just got a little rock to it. We're trying to get that rock out so that this thing will mate flat against the intake manifold and seal up the Kool-Aid again so it quits leaking. I've got some 80 grit here that I'm going to be messing with. I got some 220 grit that I'll finish it off with. I got some 150 just in between the 80 and the 220. Not putting a whole lot of pressure on this thing when I do this, and it seems like my high spot or low spot, whatever you want to think of it as, I think of it as a low spot when this is what's touching and these upper edges are not. So it's kind of across the bolt holes. Almost seems like this thing was way over tightened last time it was put on before I got my hands on it. And over the heat cycles, you know, it may have shrunk the aluminum around the bolts and maybe caused the top sides there to retract a little bit. I'm getting it a little out of level. So I'm going to go a long way on the sandpaper across these bolt holes and this little bypass valve for the coolant, and see if we can't get this thing flat again. Like I said, I'm not putting a whole lot of pressure on this thing. Kind of a process got to go through. Sorry for setting up the camera behind you, but I'm a right-handed guy and my bench is set up wrong to get you guys on the right side for me to look at you. I'm not shunning you, it's just how I work. Be a lot easier with a belt sander. You can just flat surface already, turn the sander on, just set it on there and hold it. I don't have a belt sander, so we do the manual method. That sounds pretty good there. Not getting any rocking. Give it a few more passes with the 80 grit, and then I'll switch to the 150 to give it a few more passes, and then we'll switch to the 220 and finish it off. Just trying not to have such a scratched surface when we put it back together on the car. You can also look at the surface on this thing. You probably can't see it in the camera, but there's a little low spot right there that's not quite polishing up like the rest of it on the 220. So I'm going to swap back to the 150, see if I can bring the rest of this surface down to that surface, and then we'll go back to the 150 and the 220. I think that's going to do it. We'll stick this thing back on, hook all the plumbing back up, top her off with some Kool-Aid, and see if it's still leaking. and we'll address that fuel pump that we didn't get to the other day either. I've got the fuel pump off of Ant Buck. We've got it set up in the vise here. We've got our Mighty Vac hooked up to the intake side of the fuel pump, and theoretically when you pump the lever on the fuel pump down here, it should build vacuum in the gauge, and it should hold vacuum if everything inside the pump is proper. So we'll give it a few pumps, and it is raising vacuum on the Mighty Vac, but it is not holding it. We'll get it up to 10 inches right there. Took about 20 seconds for it to go from 10 inches of mercury back down to 0. So there is something leaking inside the pump. The diaphragm in there is probably leaking. So I'll order a new pump for it if we can get it in. Put it back on and see if she'll stay idling. But hopefully this will fix our idle problem. Well, after making a few phone calls and getting a part on order, we've got our new fuel pump for Ant Buck here. And just for reference sake, I've got the Mighty Vac hooked up to it. We're going to do it the easy method with the Mighty Vac here. But if all you've got's a vacuum gauge and no Mighty Vac, you can still hook this up and pump the lever to see if it's going to pull and hold vacuum. But we'll pump her up to 10, and as you can see, staying pretty steady there at 10, where the other fuel pump was leaking down pretty quickly. So I'm going to say our fuel pump was a bit of our problem. We're going to get this one put on and see if we can get her fired up. Fuel pump bolts in right down here on the side of the front timing cover. And also part of the bolts that hold the fuel pump in are the bolts that hold the bracket for the coil pack here. I just have the coil pack mounted back to it for reference purposes. I will take the coil pack off of that bracket in order to get it put back on. Just makes it easier to access the bolts. I've got the fuel pump back on Buck here. Got the thermostat housing back on as well. I'm going to prime up the carburetor and give her a bump on the ignition, see if she'll start up for us. Fingers crossed. Not quite. Let's give her a little more in the carburetor and see what happens. Looks like it's pumping pretty good down here though, so maybe eventually it'll make it back up there. Keep her going. Still not doing it. Let's give her another dose down the carburetor and see what happens. still not where we want her to be. Might have a clog somewhere up in the line. May have to disconnect them from the tank and blow it out. It's definitely pulling a lot more fuel through the filter than it was, but it doesn't look like it's pulling enough still. Obviously, it's not staying idle. And we'll take the fuel lines off of the tank and blow them out and try pulling on the tank a little bit, see if we got something going on in there. But we'll get it figured out. Don't worry about it. We're going to give it another go here on the fuel pump with Aunt Buck. I think we got things figured out. Not going to prime the carburetor up this time. We're just going to give her a bump. It is cold. Been sitting a little while. Temperatures are down now. So we'll just see how she starts up and see if she'll idle for us. Let her idle a bit, see what happens here, but she started up pretty easy for it to be about, I don't know, 58 degrees down here in the basement. But I'll let it idle a bit and see if we've got things worked out, see if we can't call it a day on the fuel issue at least. Well, it looks like she's idled her way back up to temperature. Thermostat's open, that upper radiator hose is warm now. So I'm going to shut it off, let it cool back down. Looks like we've got this problem solved. Well, I didn't have to blow the fuel lines out on this thing. I just had to take the lines off the back between the tank and the body, or the tank and the frame. So when I went back there to check, the suction line had a hole in it about the size of a 16-penny nail, so that's why we weren't getting enough fuel up to the carburetor. But everything seems to be running good now. The coolant leak is fixed, and we obviously got our fuel system problem fixed, so she's probably ready to sail on down the road to the next owner. But thank y'all for watching, and until next time, don't take no wooden nickels and be good. Somebody's got to. I'll catch y'all on the next episode.